Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is John. This report is for the 1st of March. Well, it was a significant gap lower. The entire move up from the Friday was erased on all the war news and considerations, along with Russia being removed from some banking elements, which created some chaos, which caused a massive gap down. We dipped all the way to the 23%. And rode back up. Now, this is consistent, though, with what we see from the NBI readings. When red leads the move up, as we were talking about, often leads to consolidation once that peaks out, particularly if white NBI is still rising. So while that did that, we did get the crossover of green over red, so with the orange dip, all positive. If orange had risen here, that would have been far more bearish. As I was talking about, and we'll show it on the 5K, we had very specific points that we expected the move to come back to, and that it did exactly what was expected, mostly at the beginning of the day. So it was quite nice. From this standpoint, though, bulls are still in charge of this setup overall. Significant drop-off in shorts. It'll be interesting to see here when we get the DOC green and cyan meet, whether or not we get a pivot up prior to that, or if they continue towards each other. Again, that 50% right there at the 44.55, pretty straightforward, and the 38% is at 43.71. So I would, which is pretty much right where we closed at the 38% level right here. So that becomes pretty easy from a range below that. I think probably expect some weakness from it. It'll be easy to see on the 50K as well as 5K before that. Daily wise, we'll be watching for any pivots lower of NBI Magenta at this particular stage, because anything that crosses below white or dips back down below the 33 would have a very negative impact. NQ, not as strong, but did the exact same thing. I mean, from an identity look, it's recaptured off the gap down, which was literally to the open of Friday, and proceeded to be bought back up for well over 100 plus points, which on the S&P at least, which was pretty significant. Oil didn't go out of control, but certainly maintaining these exacerbated levels. At any point, there could be an escalation that could derail, Russia's cooperation with oil shipments and that definitely has more downside risk than even that price tag shows. The euro took a major plummet because the euro is the one that really faces the struggle as the entire ECB. Most of the business that Russia does is through European banking and that, so it becomes problematic from a Eurozone standpoint as to whether or not it will impact, their ability to have liquidity as well as transfers and that. It gets complicated when you start to deal with the banking issues, and that was sort of off the table, and then they decided to include that, and it certainly creates a lot of instability. But of course, it was clear that central banks stepped into both the market and here, because the amount of liquidity that was supplied at the point of dipping, and all of a sudden, you get these massive buy runs. Pretty clear that just wasn't coming from sideline cash. Gold elevated as expected. I mean, this actually should even be probably skyrocketing from here, because from an elevated risk standpoint, with conflict growing, I mean, you've got Ukraine pretty much on the edge there if they last much longer, but their recent application to NATO could throw things dramatically up in the air, because should NATO accept something like that, that opens up just possibilities the market just would have to digest, and not ready for that. So this caused a massive flow into treasuries, which obviously decreased the yield somewhat. We'll expect that to come back down again as things level out, because some of this was a consideration that maybe the Fed will be softer on their rate increase. And finally caught some action for Bitcoin in that coming back up on the return. Once there was some stabilization, boom, just caught the quick bid. We'd already seen magenta creeping back up in that, but once it crossed over right here within that bar early on, and then broke above 39. Once it was above the 39, it was clean sailing from there. And but again, pointing out all positive extremes at that particular point, going all the way back to 38,000. So we'll see how sustained that one becomes. ETH also caught very strong action, same part of the day. This has been a consistent pattern now we've been seeing for weeks, where markets suffering downturns, and then all of a sudden there's this money spigot that's turned on at the end of the day and lifts everything. It's like across the board buy setups. For a 50K, it was interesting because doing quite well with that setup, the gap down. Wasn't that significant. It was a 42.91 and selling at 83, so 8 points for the dip. But you know, this is one of those where there's nothing you can do when you have that significant a gap down on news that nobody was expecting at that point. And then we got the buy that was doing good, and then of course the pulled in the sell-off, and we had these numbers around 43.53 on the 5K chart because of where the 0% was on the end of Friday, and then the collapse. And so I considered that to be that pivot point that they would try and pull price back up to, which is exactly what happened after the dip. It came right back up to that, even spiked over it, but then immediately it came right back underneath it. That created a bit more of a drawdown, and then boom, they turned it around at the end of the day to drive it up. And here's what that looked like. So here was the 0% right there. 43.53 is what the print was. And so when we gapped down and they started the flux, and once you broke back above the initial dip down, then it was just a question of them trying to fill that gap space. And I thought they might do it before the open. Didn't quite get there before the open. They were pretty darn close, and that was enough to probably stave off significant margin. Because if you left a move this low without significant buildup in pre-market, because all of this took place prior to the open. The open isn't until we get all the way over here, which was literally just a small decline, relatively speaking, from the close on Friday. But a 100 plus point dip would have been significant and probably would have exacerbated the selling. So convenient, or some people just see it as buy the dip because it's a good opportunity to. And we had a lot of good buy and sell signals within some of these configurations. That one should have been the regular color for a short setup, because that's exactly what that was when that dips down. We got right here dipping below the 25. Red declining underneath the 10. White a little soft there. One more bar later it crosses over. So whether it's this one or the next one, but they're like so close, 40 versus 37 3/4. So it's a 2-point difference. But it proceeded all the way to the 50% and was looking like it should be continuation pretty weak. But strong magenta move over there was the first signal. And then white moved above at this particular point, and you had the dip below the 33, but not below yellow. Something critical to watch. The most advantageous shorts are the ones where you get the magenta dips and it goes below yellow. In this particular case, it wasn't even close to getting below yellow, and then pivoted back up, and that's clearly a buy. And that really pushed things up to that extra margin, but in doing so, created positive extremes, dipping all the way back down to the 44 level right here, and then we ended up with a series of other ones that were further higher up. And so as soon as the sell came in, those just started filling back in place. It became pretty easy to ride those ones knowing exactly what the expectations were, which makes that kind of fun. And you can see this was a lot of action for the day. Then we kind of bounced around, made the new lows, and we started getting the P2 buildup. DOC red kept rising, even though we didn't have the steel reset until a little bit later after this first wave. So by the time the second one came, the DOC was not below -13 or anything. In fact, it was in that above negative 7.5, so it wasn't between negative 7.5 and negative 13, which is what I call the no spark zone. Typically when you get pivots of the red DOC at that spot, it doesn't usually produce much of a long boom run. In fact, that's kind of exactly what happened with this one. It was a short move just to the 50% before retracing back to 23. So once it was out of that range, then you can look for bit stronger moves, and this one went all the way to 61, and then it was clear right back down. And every time it was getting close to this, I put that line up there, you can see we're right around 42 range, but you get up to the highs. Over here it was right around 53, so that was the fill back up to that same 0% line. And every time we started getting to that 0% line, we were just having breakdowns, but they were still supporting it every time it was breaking down. And like I was pointing out, as we get to this point, it was just a matter of who's going to have the strength when we get up there. And based on those readings, pretty clean. And this is that end of day pump that we saw from the cryptos as well as on the other elements. Just money piling right in there. Drove it right back up to the peaks, and it's still in buy configuration at this particular stage. So we'll see if we get any rollover in the post market in that when it starts back up again. But fantastic action to end the month, and of course that was that 55th day that they talk about from when a market reaches the high to you have 55 days in there that you can have some kind of major sell-off. So this was the final day, and actually handled it quite well. No crash of 29 or 87, anything like that. Central banks have still plenty of liquidity available. None of that's changed yet. It'll be interesting because if they do actually raise rates of any kind, then it'll become interesting on how much intervention you can actually put together. So we'll go from there. As always, though, indicators have been sent out. And there will be some additional updates because I was finalizing some of the algo strategy alert setups and that, so that you'll be able to turn those on and have them notify you of that, which would be helpful as well. As always, trade well. We'll talk to you later.